In front of the screen were 8 transparent glasses of water, one of which was filled with a deadly poison. The task of the 8 people sitting there was to each choose a glass of water and drink it. After hearing the host say so, they were not only unafraid but also rushed to make their choices. That's right, this was a life or death game. As long as they successfully passed the challenge, they would receive a huge bonus. And the 8 people sitting here, each and every one of them was carrying a mountain of debt. Living a humiliating life like this was not as good as taking a gamble here. As long as they won, their lives would turn over a new leaf. At this time, the 8 people had chosen their glasses of water, each carefully observing to see if there was anything unusual about their glass. But this was a life and death game. How could it be so easy to reveal flaws like that? From the color to the taste, all 8 glasses were exactly the same. After the host signaled for everyone to raise their glasses and drink, a man suddenly shouted, startling everyone. It turned out that he wanted to exchange his glass of water for the glass of the schoolgirl sitting opposite him. He figured that someone who looked as intelligent as her would know which glass was not poisoned. The girl happily agreed to switch glasses with him. The bald man then wanted to switch with the doctor sitting opposite him. The doctor didn't hesitate either, immediately handing over his glass of water. Seeing that no one else wanted to switch, the host signaled for the game to begin. The poison didn't take effect immediately, leaving them to wait in agony. At that moment, the fork in the bald man's hand suddenly fell. Everyone immediately turned their eyes to him. But then the man waved his hand, indicating that he had only dropped the fork because his hand was slippery. Hearing this, their faces immediately revealed disappointment. At that moment, an unusual expression appeared on the doctor's face. The poison had begun to take effect on him. Within seconds, he stopped breathing and collapsed to the floor in pain. Seeing the doctor's body, the remaining 7 people were not only not afraid but also extremely happy. Following the rules of the game, the host brought out the first chest of money and divided it among them. Each person who successfully passed the round would receive 13 million yen. Upon receiving the stack of money, the fat woman couldn't stop crying. This money could not only help her pay off her debts but also allow her to live comfortably for the rest of her life. So she immediately withdrew from the game. After being granted permission by the host, she happily took the money and left. Since someone had withdrawn midway, their bonus would also change. After deducting all expenses, the final winner could receive more than 500 million yen. This figure made everyone present feel extremely excited, each praying that they could be the last one surviving. Unexpectedly, the fat woman returned, wanting to continue the game because she felt that the profit from this game was too great. The 13 million yen was no longer enough to satisfy her greed. Everyone expressed their disapproval because once she returned, their winnings would be significantly reduced. Hearing this, the host decided to add another 100 million yen to appease everyone. After a night of rest, they came to the second round of the game. This time, the host had prepared a pillow for each of them. While everyone was wondering what was going on, the host brought in the main prop. It turned out that in this round, he wanted everyone to play Russian roulette. Each person's gun had 1 bullet. The players would point the gun at their own heads and pull the trigger. And the pillow would be used to place in the middle of the room in case blood splattered on the floor. At this time, the bald man suddenly spoke up, asking what would happen if everyone fired at the same time and 3 or 4 people died at once. The host informed them that those who were shot would certainly not survive and would be immediately eliminated from the game. This was indeed good news for those who were lucky enough to survive. As the host was about to signal the continuation of the game, the schoolgirl once again offered to exchange her gun with everyone else. Looking at her luck from the previous round, both the bald man and the gray-haired man wanted to step up and exchange guns with her. However, the girl this time maintained her original choice, switching guns with the gray-haired uncle. Seeing this, the bald man was extremely disappointed. The short-haired girl then offered to exchange her gun with him. Although he seemed hesitant, in the end, he still decided to switch guns with her. After no one else had any objections, the host announced the start of the second round. Everyone took turns raising their guns, aiming at their temples, and after the host's command, they pulled the trigger. However, even after 2 consecutive rounds, everyone remained unharmed. The tension had reached its peak. The bald man stood up, intending to go to the bathroom to relieve himself, but was stopped by the host. This game, once started, could not be interrupted midway. He then urged everyone to quickly proceed with the third round. After hearing his command, everyone began to tremble as they picked up their guns and pulled the trigger. This time, a deafening explosion finally rang out, feathers flew everywhere, and the short-haired girl lay lifeless on the ground. Thanks to exchanging props with someone else, the bald man once again escaped death. The host announced that the game was over. Joy was evident on their faces, except for the schoolgirl, who was terrified. Perhaps she was still too young to accept such brutality. The short-haired girl was out of the game, leaving 6 people. Each person would receive 18 million yen as a reward for passing the round. The next day, after waking up, the host took them to the location of the 3rd round. In front of them now was a small swimming pool. The rotating compartments on the right side of the pool were where they would compete. The 3rd round was called breath holding. Each person would choose a compartment and dive down, holding their breath. The longer they could hold their breath, the more reward money they would receive. But in the hearts of the 6 people, they all knew that this was a life or death game, and there was no way the rules would be that simple. Seeing their confused expressions, the host laughed and told them that among the 6 compartments, one would be impossible to open once closed. Therefore, whoever was unlucky enough to choose that compartment would suffocate to death. Hearing this, everyone felt terrified of this painful way of dying, except for the fat woman, who was still cheerfully looking around. After a while of observation, she told everyone that the last compartment was the safest, so she told the schoolgirl to choose this one. Hearing this, everyone advised the girl to make her own decision, as this was a critical moment that would determine her life or death. But having lived together for the past few days, she and the fat woman had become good friends. She believed that the woman would never harm her, so she decisively went to the compartment the fat woman had pointed out. Before she jumped down, the fat woman even gave her a protective amulet. After she jumped down, everyone else also began to choose their positions. The bald man used the excuse of being afraid of water to jump down last. It wasn't until the long-haired woman had chosen her position that he tremblingly crawled down into the pool. After everyone was in position, the host walked over to the rope and began the countdown. As soon as he counted to 1, all 6 people simultaneously plunged into the water, and the compartment lid slammed shut. At this moment, their hearts were pounding, wondering if the lids above their heads would open. Under this fear, the gray-haired man could no longer hold his breath and kicked his way up to the surface. Fortunately, the lid opened smoothly. Following him were the fat woman, the nervous man, and the schoolgirl. After surfacing, the girl hurriedly thanked the fat woman. The trust between the two deepened. Now only the long-haired woman and the bald man had yet to surface. So the person eliminated this round would definitely be one of them. Those who had already made it to the surface were now holding their breaths in anticipation. After another half a minute, their limits had been reached. With the sound of rushing water, the lid of the compartment where the long-haired woman was finally opened. The sound of the bald man's compartment lid echoing hopelessly gradually faded away. The host announced that the bald man was officially eliminated from the game. At the end of this round, each person received an additional 24 million yen. And the long-haired woman, who held her breath the longest, also received an additional 10 million yen as a bonus. Everyone had now received at least 54 million yen, but none of them wanted to leave the game. After experiencing 3 consecutive rounds, everyone was confident that they would be the final winner. To add to the excitement of the game, the host invited another secret guest. It was said that he was the one who had been lucky enough to win the prize money from the last 3 games. For someone like that, if he wasn't extremely lucky, he must have some trick to be able to pass through so smoothly. But regardless of the reason, it would be harmful to the 5 people here, so they refused to let him join. At this time, the man took out all the prize money he had won in the previous 3 games, indicating that if they agreed to let him participate, he would add it to the final prize pool. Seeing the huge amount of money in front of them, everyone was moved. At this time, the schoolgirl began to propose an idea. If he had been lucky enough to pass so many rounds, they could totally use him as a guide. That way, if they survived to the end, they would get even more money. It sounded reasonable, so they eventually agreed to let the man join. After the discussion ended, the host took them to the 4th life or death game. 6 chairs were arranged in the room, one of which was connected to a 10,000-volt high-voltage power line. As soon as the host flipped the switch, the person sitting on that chair would be electrocuted to death. Hearing this, the gray-haired man and the fat woman trembled with fear. They had medical conditions, so electricity passing through them would be excruciating. The host quickly reassured them, saying that the 10,000 volts of electricity would knock them out in an instant without feeling any pain. This could be considered the quickest and most painless way to die. After explaining the rules of the game, the host quickly invited them to choose their chairs. They heard and let the man with glasses choose first, so he smirked and sauntered over to pick one at random and sat down. The remaining 5 people gathered their heads together to play rock, paper, scissors. The winner would have the right to switch places with someone else. Fortunately, luck once again smiled upon the gray-haired man, who quickly went over and asked the man with glasses to give up his seat. The man with glasses, despite his appearance, was generous and quickly stood up to give way to the old man before finding another chair to sit on. Waiting until everyone was settled, the host signaled for them to take off their shoes and socks and place their bare feet on the metal plate. He then went to the electrical box and announced the official start of the fourth round. As soon as the switch was flipped, the lights in the room flickered and went out due to overload. Although only one person was electrocuted, everyone screamed out of fear. The game only lasted 10 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When the host cut off the power, the lights in the room came back on. Everyone looked at each other in a daze, except for the man with glasses, who sat motionless. His feet had been burned to a crisp by the high voltage. Living life, one should never be too arrogant, otherwise, sooner or later, there would be a day when death comes too quickly to regret. Before participating in the game, the man with glasses promised to contribute all of his winnings to the common fund, so their reward for this round was also significantly increased. Specifically, each person would receive an additional 29 million yen. Hearing that, everyone cheered with joy. At this point, the money earned was enough for the nervous man and the schoolgirl to pay off their debts. The host then advised them to withdraw from the game, take the money to pay off their debts, and enjoy a prosperous life from now on. But to everyone's surprise, none of them agreed to withdraw. After 4 consecutive rounds, the prize money from each round had awakened their bottomless greed. This amount of money was nothing to them. Hearing this, the host didn't bother to persuade them further, telling them to go back and rest and wait for the 5th game to begin. In the blink of an eye, it was evening the next day. The 5 of them went to the living room, and as soon as they opened the door, they smelled the delicious aroma of hot pot. They thought they would eat before playing, but they never expected that the hot pot in front of them was the 5th obstacle they had to overcome. In the pot at this time were 5 kinds of colorful mushrooms, one of which was highly poisonous. Each player had to choose one type to put in their bowl and then invite someone else to eat it. To be fair, the host had them draw cards to decide the order in which they would choose the mushrooms. Looking at the situation in front of them, they were extremely tense because the first person to choose mushrooms would have a very high chance of winning. After a tense round of drawing cards, the order of choosing mushrooms was decided. First was the long-haired woman, followed by the gray-haired man, the nervous man, the fat woman, and finally the schoolgirl. Having the advantage, the long-haired woman laughed heartily and stepped forward to the hot pot, picking up the most vividly colored mushroom and placing it in front of the gray-haired man, whom she disliked the most. The old man looked angry but could do nothing. After receiving the bowl of mushrooms from the long-haired woman, he picked up his own bowl and chose the most vibrant bunch. They thought that this time he would bring it to the long-haired woman, but he placed it in front of the nervous man. It was then the nervous man's turn to choose mushrooms. Because he didn't want anyone to die because of him, he picked up the most ordinary-looking mushroom and gave it to the long-haired woman. So the most interesting scene finally arrived. At this moment, the 2 close friends had to choose poisonous mushrooms to feed each other. There were only 2 kinds of mushrooms left in the pot. The fat woman told the schoolgirl to use the knowledge she had learned to analyze which one was poisonous. Then she would pick up the remaining one and give it to her. Hearing her sweet talk, the girl was moved to tears and immediately pointed out to her that the yellow mushrooms were poisonous. Because when she was in school, her teacher had once taught her about this kind of mushroom. But before she could wipe her tears, the woman had already brought the bowl of yellow mushrooms and placed it in front of her. It was only then that the girl realized she had been tricked by the fat woman. But it was too late for regrets. Under the host's urging, the girl tremblingly picked up the last mushroom, put it in her bowl, and brought it to the fat woman. Then, at the host's urging, everyone simultaneously picked up their bowls and ate. After eating, everyone went to the living room to wait for the time to say goodbye to their little sister. To comfort the schoolgirl, the long-haired woman painted her nails beautifully. The little girl immediately became happier and said that even if she died, it wouldn't be in vain if she could still be beautiful like this. At that moment, the situation suddenly changed. The jar of popcorn in the fat woman's hand spilled all over the floor, and she clutched her neck in pain before collapsing to the ground. Seeing her struggling in vain, the little girl whispered into the fat woman's ear. How could her petty tricks escape her notice? The girl's evil smile at this moment made everyone present shudder. After receiving 43 million yen, the schoolgirl took off the amulet that the fat woman had given her and asked the host to throw it away for her. Soon, it was time for the 6th round. The host and the remaining 3 waited but didn't see the gray-haired man. Perhaps he felt he had earned enough and had taken the initiative to withdraw. To fill the void he left, the host invited another guest to participate in the game. And this person turned out to be the policeman who had come to investigate the mysterious disappearances in this place. Seeing that he had joined the ranks, the host began to introduce the sixth game. In this round, the player would have to stick their head out the window and wait for the host to press a button. A trapdoor with a blade attached to it would then fall. The person who chose that window would instantly be decapitated. Hearing the barbaric rules of the game, everyone shuddered. The schoolgirl even deliberately whispered in the policeman's ear that the previous person who was called in had died in the first round, and it might be his turn this time, scaring the policeman out of his wits. After explaining the rules, the host gave them a few minutes to choose their favorite window. The schoolgirl dashed to the farthest window on the left. After passing the previous round, she seemed very confident in her fate. At this time, the policeman wanted to open all the windows to observe for any abnormalities, but the host told him that this death game was entirely based on luck, so no matter how carefully he observed, he would not be able to spot any flaws. While the policeman was still hesitating, the nervous man went straight to the farthest window on the right. Now there were only 2 windows left for the 2 of them to split. Unexpectedly, at this moment, the 2 of them simultaneously walked towards the second window on the left. The 2 had no choice but to play a game to determine the winner, and in the end, the long-haired woman lost and had to give up this window to the policeman. After everyone had made their choices, the host signaled for them to stick their heads out the windows and then began the countdown. But this time, he didn't count down from 3 but started from 10, making the wait for death even more terrifying. At the end of the countdown, the host slammed his hand down on the switch, and a blade as thin as paper shot down, making a clean cut. For a few seconds afterward, the bodies of the 4 players remained motionless. The first to emerge from the window was the nervous man, followed by the long-haired woman. Both of them collapsed to the ground, trembling. So the dead person must be either the policeman or the schoolgirl. At this moment, a smile suddenly appeared on the policeman's face. He happily stepped back from the window and excitedly cheered, congratulating himself for escaping death. It was clear who had been eliminated this time. The schoolgirl, as she wished, left this world with her beautiful nails. The remaining 3 players each received 72 million yen. After the game ended, the long-haired woman and the nervous man suddenly became suspicious about the gray-haired man's unusual disappearance because when they checked his room, they found his wallet and luggage still there. He emphasized to the 2 of them that he was only hired to run the game and knew nothing else. Seeing his evasive attitude, the 2 became even more suspicious. To get to the bottom of things, the long-haired woman suggested that he show them the surveillance footage because they had the right to know what had happened to their fellow player. Left with no other choice, he had to take them to the security room to review the surveillance footage from yesterday. After rewinding and fast-forwarding, they finally spotted the gray-haired man, but after he walked into a blind spot of the camera, the surveillance video was inexplicably cut off. The long-haired woman thought that maybe during that time, the camera had captured something unusual, so the host had deleted it because he was the only one who had access to this room. But at this time, the host told them that he didn't even know how to use a computer, let alone delete footage. Then, to avoid trouble, he called security to chase them away. Because the long-haired woman was determined to get to the bottom of things, she secretly followed the host the next day and found him entering a secret passageway in the wall. She felt that she was getting closer to the truth, so she dared to follow him inside, unaware that her every move was being recorded by surveillance cameras. While the long-haired woman was looking around, the host suddenly appeared from behind, startling her. He told her that this was not a place where players could go and urged her to go back. At this time, she continued to ask him about the secret regarding the missing man, but he insisted that he was just an employee here and knew nothing else. With that, he opened the door to the storage room, only to find the body of the missing man lying there. Seeing that the host looked very calm, the long-haired woman suspected that he was the murderer. But he immediately denied it, saying that he wouldn't dare do such a thing. Regardless of who killed the man, she didn't need to care because his death wouldn't affect the progress of the game. He told the long-haired woman not to mention this to the other 2, to go back and rest, and prepare for the next game. In the blink of an eye, evening arrived. The host brought the remaining 3 to the location of the 7th game. At this time, a large bow and arrow were placed on the table. The rules were simple. 5 chairs were placed around the table, and the players only needed to choose a chair and sit down. Once the game started, the host would spin the table. When the table stopped, the arrow would shoot out, and whoever was hit by the arrow would be eliminated from the game. If the bow landed on an empty chair, the host would spin the table again until someone was hit, and then the game would end. At this time, the long-haired woman asked if they would be eliminated if the arrow only hit their shoulder. But the host said that this would never happen because they had precisely calculated the trajectory of the arrow. It would definitely pierce the victim's heart. Although they said the life or death game was entirely based on luck, they still wanted to analyze and choose the most suitable seat. The nervous man quickly sat down to the side of the bow. He felt that as long as he wasn't facing the bow, he would be relatively safe. Then the policeman chose his position, which was behind the bow. The long-haired woman didn't believe in these calculations, so she decided to sit in the most dangerous spot, right in front of the bow. Seeing that everyone had chosen their seats, the host was about to announce the start when the policeman suddenly stood up and jumped to the seat on the right of the nervous man. So who would be the lucky one to escape death? The answer would be revealed immediately. The table spun, then gradually slowed down. Everyone felt terrified, their breathing stifled. Even the host was scared and hid to the side, carefully using a shield to protect himself. In the first round, all 3 players were lucky enough to escape. The arrow plunged straight into the empty chair. Seeing this, the policeman cheered with joy. If he hadn't switched seats just now, he would have been dead. As the host was about to spin the table for the next round, the policeman suddenly jumped up and asked if he could sit back in his previous chair because he believed that the arrow wouldn't fly there again. As soon as the host agreed, he immediately ran back to his old spot. The long-haired woman sitting opposite him laughed at him, but he insisted that this was science and couldn't be wrong. After listening to their endless arguments, the host resumed spinning the table. The faces of the nervous man and the long-haired woman were now filled with fear. And the policeman showed a smug smile. The spin gradually slowed down, the arrow passed over the policeman, also passed over the nervous man. Seeing this, the long-haired woman's heart skipped a beat. When the arrow was released from the bow, the host's face showed surprise. It turned out that the arrow could actually shoot twice in a row at the same spot, and the one hit this time was the policeman. In these games of chance, the more you calculate, the sooner you lose. The 7th game finally ended, leaving only the nervous man and the long-haired woman. Their 8th game would be held outdoors. As they were shackled, one of them was destined to die. The host began to introduce the rules of the game. There were 8 ropes here, 2 of which were connected to a giant iron ball hanging below. Their leg shackles were also connected to the iron ball. They would take turns cutting one rope at a time. If they were lucky enough to cut the rope connected to their opponent's iron ball, they would become the winner, and the other person would be crushed by the 400-pound ball. And if they were unlucky enough to cut the rope tied to their own leg, they would suffer the same fate. After explaining the rules, the host told the 2 to discuss among themselves who would cut first. Upon hearing this, both of them seemed hesitant. They were only one step away from the huge reward, but this time, their eyes were filled with apprehension. It turned out that after spending so much time together, they had developed feelings for each other. They had even spent the previous night entangled with each other, but now they had to face off like enemies. After 2 rounds of rock, paper, scissors, the long-haired woman finally won. She was afraid that she would cut her own rope, so as the host began the countdown, she quickly interrupted him and told him not to be sad if she died. It turned out that the host was her uncle. After speaking, the long-haired woman took a deep breath and decisively cut a rope. This time, luck was on her side once again, as the 2 iron balls didn't budge. She handed the scissors to the nervous man. Before cutting the rope, he turned to her and said that in this life, he truly wished to grow old with her, but reality was too cruel, not allowing them to be together. But to his surprise, he was also lucky enough to escape death this time. But luck was just luck. In the end, one of them had to die. The scissors were once again in the hands of the long-haired woman. At this point, not only were they nervous, but even the host felt incredibly tense. Seeing that the rope was cut but the iron ball didn't move, the long-haired woman just had time to breathe a sigh of relief when the iron ball suddenly began to fall, dragging her down with it. The nervous man immediately reached out to grab her hand, but no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't overcome the pull of gravity. A few seconds later, there was a loud bang, and the long-haired woman was crushed to death. The host choked back tears as he announced that the long-haired woman had died, and the game was over. But at this moment, he couldn't bring himself to be happy either. He knelt on the ground, wailing, his eyes filled with tears. And so, the nervous man became the winner and received the 700 million yen prize. They thought the story ended there, but the camera suddenly shifted focus. A masked figure appeared on the screen, watching from afar. After going through 8 grueling rounds, eliminating 9 players, they thought the nervous man would take the money and enjoy a luxurious life out there. But unexpectedly, he chose to stay and confront the person behind these brutal games. Just as he finished speaking, the masked figure appeared. He couldn't believe that the person was the bald man who had died in the 3rd round. It turned out that the reason they organized this life or death game was to conduct medical research. He had created software that could predict when each participant would be eliminated. To verify the accuracy of this software, he spent a large sum of money to attract people to participate in this death game. and the results showed that his system had accurately predicted all the deaths in each round. After explaining all this to the nervous man, he told him something even crazier. He was currently planning to study the self-rescue ability of each person. He wanted to see if the will to survive of those who were as lucky as him was stronger than that of ordinary people. Hearing this, the nervous man sneered. He was currently holding hundreds of millions of yen in assets. Why would he agree to participate in this meaningless experiment with him? But the bald man had already guessed his thoughts. After experiencing 8 rounds of life or death games, he had long been addicted to the thrill of chance and couldn't escape it. It was like gambling. Once you started, it was hard to quit. No matter how much money you won, as long as there was a chance to keep betting, you would never give up. To his surprise, his guess was right. The nervous man agreed to participate in the experiment with him. But this experiment still lacked one more person, so he turned to the host and tried to persuade him. To his surprise, the host immediately agreed. It seemed that he was also someone who didn't value his life. Soon, the death game officially began. The bald man brought out a tray full of syringes and began to inject each person with the drug. To survive, they had to inject 3 doses, but he only brought 5 doses. After receiving the first injection, the two had to play rock paper scissors to decide who would receive the next injection. Whoever received all 3 doses first would be the final survivor. After explaining the rules, the bald man took out 2 envelopes of different colors from his pocket. Inside the white envelope was a check for 10 billion yen for the winner. And the black envelope contained the name of the person who would die. It turned out that the bald man had used his system to predict who would be the final survivor. This was his moment to verify the results of his research. Under the bald man's loud command, the game officially began. The first winner was the host. Seeing this, the bald man was ecstatic, picked up the syringe, and gave the host another injection. The second winner was the nervous man. Now the 2 sides were tied, and there were only 3 doses of antidote left on the table. The bald man looked extremely excited and urged them to continue to the next round. This time, the host won again, which meant that as long as he won one more round, he would be the survivor and receive the 1 billion yen reward. The door was almost open to the nervous man. Fortunately, in the next round, he was the one who won. Now there was only 1 dose of antidote left on the table, and the next game would determine the final survivor. The 2 of them glared at each other, hoping that their momentum could overwhelm the other. After 3 consecutive draws, their morale was almost drained, and they hurriedly turned away to adjust their emotions. In the final round, the nervous man was victorious. After getting the result of the game, the bald man took out the piece of paper inside the black envelope. Unexpectedly, his system had accurately predicted the outcome of this match. The final dose of antidote was injected into the nervous man. The host, sitting beside him, calmly accepted his fate. After giving a thumbs up to the nervous man, he breathed his last. At this time, the nervous man's mood was extremely complicated. He picked up the check and staggered outside. At that moment, the system suddenly announced that the bald man's luck had surpassed the nervous man's. If the 2 of them were to compete now, the bald man would be the winner. The bald man hurriedly ran out to the hallway, chasing after the nervous man, asking him to play rock paper scissors with him one more time. Whether the nervous man agreed or not, he still showed his hand, but a second later, the smile on the bald man's face froze. Even without turning his head, the nervous man had still played scissors and defeated him. How could this be? The system clearly calculated that his chances of winning were higher. His system wasn't as magical as he thought. The previous predictions were just coincidences. The bald man found it hard to accept this harsh reality and turned to look at the host, but he didn't know when the host had disappeared.